issues that he has placed on table are absolutely important in terms of how India takes forward the G20 presidency, in what way we showcase India's accomplishment. And I think he's absolutely right in terms of emphasizing bringing in fellow developing countries. His emphasis on Global South is something which is also echoing what Dr. Jaishankar said in the inaugural session and what Prime Minister said in Bali. And I think Mr. Amitabh Kant quoted Prime Minister in terms of bringing forward the idea as to how we take technology to our fellow partner countries. The idea of soft power that Mr. Amitabh Kant alluded to is something which is there. We would have to see how India's traditional negotiating positions, which are there on technology, on access, on equity from technology, its inclusion, they are some of the framework elements which are extremely important when we talk about India's G20 leadership, but also India's prowess related to technology. And that's where I think the new approach, the new power game, as we heard in the inaugural session today, is very important. And I'm so glad to begin, Ashley, with you. As a commentator on geopolitics, how you unbundle the role of technology, as we heard from Mr. Amitabh Kant in the most eloquent manner, as to how our accomplishment not only narrates our own story, but also narrates a story which is becoming almost, if I can bracket it as soft power, which he also did. But in that sense, the geopolitics also dominates. How you see the whole development in the context that you have been commenting on geopolitics?
So thank you, Sachin. Let me address that question in several layers. To start, every age has found some critical driver which drives the economics and the politics of the age. In the early 20th century, it was essentially industrialization and the ability to bend metal. Today, it's technology in different forms, which we loosely describe as information communication technologies because they are truly ubiquitous. And the countries that dominate computing technologies will essentially be those countries that end up the most competitive in the international system. So as Dr. Jaishankar said this morning, this rivalry is going to be more than just technology. It's going to spin over into politics. Now, what does that mean for India? I think India's digital achievements give it a real leg up in a world that is divided into many competing approaches. So let's start with the United States. The United States has created sophisticated technologies, primarily through the private sector, which has developed both soft and hard infrastructure, and uses product monetization to essentially pay for that development. The EU has essentially piggybacked on that model, but has put very strong privacy rights and consumer rights, but essentially on a private sector model. China is an entirely different universe on the opposite side. What India has managed to do is actually bring together the private and the public in a virtuous interaction. And what Mr. Kant spoke earlier about digital public goods serving as the backbone on which many private entities can then piggy on becomes a solution that is very attractive, especially to countries that do not have a highly sophisticated technological sector. So in that sense, we often talk about India as being a bridging power. It's going to be very interesting to see whether the Indian solution, which uses a digital public backbone, creates a platform for private entities to then work off that backbone, becomes the new bridging solutions, particularly in the countries of the Global South, where they do not have a private sector of the fecundity and the sophistication that we have in the US. And I think part of India's ambition in the G20 presidency year is really to just promote the use of this model and see whether it can become a new standard for countries outside the advanced OECD economies.
Thank you, Ashley. As you would agree, those who bring in technology on table They also contribute in terms of how you do the norm setting in terms of global governance. How you look at this new role for India? We have largely been norm takers and not contributing to norm setting. With this rise in technology power that we are talking about, and it is not confined anymore to digital technology per se. We are doing innovation, as Mr. Amitabh Kant emphasized. We are contributing, as Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, in nuclear technology, in biotechnology, and many other, even convergence of nano, biotech, and ICT, unique initiatives by several companies in India now. How you look at India contributing to the global governance component of technology. And from that perspective, I'm also trying to connect what Prime Minister said in Bali at the G20 meet in terms of we contributing and accelerating collective action. So this whole idea of open source technology, unlike what US stood for, intellectual property, which is going right up to utility patents and things like that. So how you carve out a situation where you are committed more in terms of collective gain, and which both Dr. Jaishankar and Shri Amitabh Kant emphasized?
So I don't want to have an excessively cynical view on this, but the golden rule is essentially who has the gold makes the rules, right? So it's not sufficient to say that we have a superior conceptual model which is built on open standards. I think you're going to have to ask a second question. Do you have the resources to encourage others to essentially adopt that model and thereby create an ecosystem which creates the opportunities that you want? My view is that India has a brilliant idea. The question that I think still remains to be seen is whether India, one, will have the resources to entice others to adopt that idea, because adoption is a costly process. It does require resource commitments. And two, whether India can persuade the international community, in particular international financial institutions, to provide money to countries to adopt the Indian solution. Now, again, this is where we're going to get into geopolitics, and to be, very blunt about it, there is going to be a US model that is very different. And while India and the United States partner in so many areas of geopolitics, this is one area where there will be an uneasy coexistence, and we will have to find terms of managing what will be a rivalry between an open model and a proprietary model. And I think this is a fight that will be worked out country by country, institution by institution. So we are just at the beginning of this process. The last word has not yet been spoken.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. Let me now turn to Mr. Sunil Mittal. Good morning, sir. I think at the outset, as Mr. Amitabh Kant also mentioned, let me congratulate Bharti Enterprises for contributing to the immense infrastructure that the country may be proud of, both in terms of digital infrastructure, but also in terms of connectivity that you have provided. But as it says, dil mange more. So I think what you see in terms of what more is to be done when we talk about digital infrastructure in this country.
Thank you, Sachin. First of all, let me say, even people like us who are long-term practitioners of, digital infrastructure, creating of digital highways in the country, are left stunned when you, in a very small, encapsulated manner, hear all the progress that has been made, that Mr. Kant talked about this morning, the data that he spewed out in terms of the numbers and the sheer scale of what is being done in this country is truly mind-boggling. And that India is now today ready to use that not as a hard gold or hard asset to trade with the world, but what we heard from Mr. Kant was soft power. We will be happy to share the gains that India has made in the digital area with the rest of the world on bases which are not extractive. So India has its oil now, the newfound oil, which is our digital stack, which is our new-found enthusiasm of young tech entrepreneurs, the startup culture, the massive amount of work that has been done on digital identity, the JAM Trinity, as the Prime Minister has titled it, the Jan Dhan, the banking accounts for all linked through mobile and digital identity is a very, very powerful tool. And I can tell you, we use it all the time for our KYC, for onboarding millions of customers every week. And the cost to do that is mind-boggling. It's absolutely nothing. We're talking about, you can't even count it in cents. Now, there are countries out there, 133 countries we heard, which are crying out to get onto such kind of activities. And they can't look to the West. It's too expensive. It's IP-based. Anything that you touch from there is extremely expensive. India couldn't afford it, and if India wouldn't have found its own rhythm, it would have been left far behind, because as you all know, India's hard infrastructure is still woefully inadequate. While we are moving at breakneck speed, we need decades to get to a world-class infrastructure. But that is where I would say the digital substitution that we found at a very, very low cost, at frugal levels on mass scale, is the answer to the world. And there will be affluent countries which will want all the bells and whistles that the US will provide. But there are lots of countries. I work in 14 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. They cannot afford that. But can India plug its soft power there? And absolutely yes. And that's something that India is already working on. And I personally feel that this could also be a tool for India to regain or reclaim Africa, which to my mind the last 10, 15, 20 years we've lost to China. Africa was always much more closer to India, especially the eastern part of Africa. And it kind of yielded to China, who put out big checks and big projects. And this will be the way for us to get back into African hearts and minds. Coming back to India, I think what was very important was to lay out a digital infrastructure. And I've been a traveler on this journey from 1980 to 83, when we started manufacturing India's first digital phones. And to that extent, I would say what has been achieved here has been absolutely tremendous, whether it's fiber, highways, whether it is the radio waves, whether it's been the massive proliferation of mobile networks. And now the new enthusiasm that India has found through space, which will be the SATCOM delivered to those places, which may perhaps never be covered for the next 10, 15 years, deep in rural India, deserts, mountains, forests, oceans, in air, and all that is coming as well. So I would say India has put in very high amounts of hard dollars in building the infrastructure on which what Mr. Khan described as the ecosystem that has been developed. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. I mean, this is a very, very capital-intensive industry. It requires billions of dollars. It's a relentless thing. Sometimes we feel we are on a treadmill. You just keep on running. I mean, there is really no pause. You move from one technology to another. By the time we had rolled out 3G, it was obsolete. We had to quickly move to 4G. And as we have put out billions of dollars in 4G, including on spectrum, we have 5G upon us, which is probably going to have the fastest and widest rollout anywhere in the world. And we know now the talk of 6G has started. So there is really no respite here. So all I wish is government keeps on looking at this infrastructure in a more benign way. And one area where I keep on always raising my voice is it is still a very heavily taxed sector. And that is where the government needs to focus on. If this is indeed the fundamental platform for how India is going to deliver to its masses all the goodies that the government needs to give it to its society, I think we need to be taken better care of. It's very important that we have a robust, sustainable digital infrastructure providers in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal. Thanks a lot. Good that you referred to Africa. When I was doing my work, Logic of Sharing with the Oxford University Press, I did visit a couple of African countries and saw the CSR that Airtel is doing in several of these countries. I think it's absolutely important what you emphasized in terms of not just as corporate social responsibility, but also be connecting with Africa, with fellow countries. My next question to you is more in terms of India's G20 presidency. As Mr. Amitabh Kant mentioned, the technology contribution, the role that we discussed this morning of geopolitics, how you look at India's G20 presidency from your own sector and your own experience, how you look at in what way India can contribute and what are the sectors you think the Indian G20 presidency should contribute in?
Well, I think G20 has come to this country under this presidency at a very difficult time at one level, but equally a very, very important and exciting time. What can India contribute through this 1 year of presidency? I think a lot of things can be done. First and foremost, I think the world is a very fractured place today. Unfortunately, we'll be taking over when the world is really in many parts of the globe at loggerheads. There are many, many fault lines that have developed in the last just 12 months, 24 months. And can India, use its, strengths, its long-standing image of a peace-loving nation to bring some of these warring factions together? And we all know that India can really talk to both sides. And that is the power that India enjoys. It is accepted by both sides. More importantly, the two warring factions also accept India as, in some sense, a peace broker. So India has a role to play. And it can probably use this platform to start to bring some harmony around the globe. We will never be able to probably agree on all the issues, but there are larger issues at stake. People will be really facing poverty and hunger across the globe. We need to fix the situation there. Secondly, much has been talked about. I won't take too much time. India will use this opportunity for calling out on the digital divide. And I think the Prime Minister made a point in Indonesia that will be one of the areas where Government of India will work. And the third one really is India will connect G20 to Africa in a much more deeper and meaningful way. And it must do that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Mittal. Let me now turn to Ms. Nivruti Roy. Thanks a lot for joining the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As you heard Mr. Kant, explaining in terms of what would be our priority, what would be our connect, we also heard Mr. Mittal explaining out his ideas and his recommendations and suggestions. Let me bring to you the Bali Declaration, where they have talked about digital connectivity, digital infrastructure. And that's where I would very much like to ask you how you see this whole question of digital infrastructure, particularly if I juxtapose requirements that are there in our own neighborhood. Since I'm also on the board of the Reserve Bank, we are grappling with this question of SWIFT and the alternatives of SWIFT and the challenges that we are facing in several parts of the world. So how you look at this infrastructure more from the point of view of our neighbors? How do we facilitate? As you are aware, one of the morning's breakfast discussion here is also about digital currency. So how you look at this question of infrastructure and neighborhood?
Sure, thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. And you heard a little bit of what, you talked about Africa and importance of Africa and the distance, proximity to India versus China. Let me just set a little bit of a context. During COVID, what happened? The world ran on the technologies of shoulders of technology. Whether it was shopping, whether it was actually working, it did not matter where you were located. That told me that distance does not matter. What matters is trust, and what matters is technology. So just for a moment, I'm trying to make you imagine a world map. Today, the world map is based on geography, the land masses, the water. What I'm imagining is a world map which is based on technology, which is based on digital, and which is based on trust. What you will see is a map that emerges where India will have neighbors who we trust. Whether it is, United States, whether it is Israel, whether it is Japan, whether it's Australia based on Quad or I2U2 or G20, you name it. It's going to be based on trust. Now, how this will happen is you will not see a political map, you'll not see a geographical traditional map, you'll see a digital map. And all of the countries will be connected which have trust. And believe me, we have technologies already that can enable. There's digital highway that we just heard that is being built. Already, many of us have experienced sporadic 5G on our phones. And, you see the value of 5G. But the roads up to 4G were getting heavily, overutilized. So then we opened up 30 gigahertz beyond, more highways for 5G. What I want to say is, if the world is going to be built on digital trust and trust-based geography, what is going to define, what used to be land is data. Data and the trust based on data, the corridors that you build with other nations, and therefore the value that you can bring based on collaborative trust and innovation and invention. India is synonymous to data, India is synonymous to software, and India is synonymous to the large number of people, which is essentially data factory. What we need to do to build those infrastructure is focus on two things, manufacturing and manufacturing with quality. And the other thing is stable policies. And I really believe that the need of the world is collaborative innovations, and we have a lot to offer. We need to build those trust-based geographies that can drive innovation. So the infrastructure that I talked about is going to be leveraging the highways that are already being built and technologies that can then offset the data privacy, the data localization, all of those requirements through technologies like federated learning. Federated learning will enable your data to stay where it is and yet create the value of the data where the data is required. So I honestly believe digital neighbor is what you're talking about. Digital trust-based geography is what we're talking about, and then leverage all of that, and that's the infrastructure. The other thing I want to highlight is, I come from a semiconductor industry, so I have to bring it up. The semiconductor market today is about $500 billion. By 2027, 2030, the semiconductor requirement is going to become $1 trillion. Synonymous to that, in India today, the data centers that we have, whether it is enterprise or whether it's hyperscaler, we have about 750 megawatt of data center requirement today. My belief is by 2027, 2030 is going to at least double. So 2 gigawatt is the need. Just like semiconductor is doubling up, data center is going to double up. So in digital infrastructure is digital connectivity. Digital infrastructure is digital storage, which is these data centers, and we have to enable doubling up, if not more. And the last thing is, compute, artificial intelligence, hyperscalers, HPC, high performance kind of compute. And I honestly believe that India by 2025 will have its own indigenous HPC if it works with its strength, which is software. And like I said yesterday, hardware is nothing different than software. It's a very expensive software that gets printed. So leverage our software and mathematical capability, leverage our people, and enable it with stable policy.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Rai. I think, as you rightly said, we need manufacturing and we need stable policy. Before Mr. Amitabh Kant moved out of Niti Aayog, one important contribution, brilliant contribution, was PLI scheme. That has given huge impetus to manufacturing, and that was a paradigm shift, because hitherto we assumed that services sector would steer us through, but now we are realizing that for Atmanirbhar India, we have to have manufacturing with us. You emphasized that point. My question to you is, in terms of India's self-sufficiency in this sector, or even to bring in supply chain resilience, how you look at the next few policy steps that are needed to go in that direction?
The way I look at how policy can enable in many different ways is you have to look at the entire end-to-end system. If you talk about semiconductors, if you talk about manufacturing, you have to look at supply and you have to look at demand. So the ecosystem needs to be built up for manufacturing. In terms of, I'll just give you an example of semiconductors, you have to have fabless design houses. You have to be building IPs. You have to be able to either import those very expensive equipments, because I don't think self-reliance, self-sufficiency means do everything yourself. You need to lead to do, and then bring in things that you don't want to build expertise. So my whole suggestion is look at the entire supply demand, look at all of the components that are going to be required from raw materials, from clean gases, from water. Just let me tell you, for a fab, which a lot of us are so interested in, each day, a mega fab needs 12 million liters of water a day. Smaller fabs, can go with 1/4 of it, which translates into thousands of people's need of water. So we have to have that ability. So before we start thinking, there are many, crawl, walk, run kind of steps. Enable assembly, enable packaging, enable validation of semiconductors. Then look at, what can we do in terms of, and this journey doesn't have to be, several years. We can do it in few years. Like I said, I believe in partnership. China was not built by itself. China started supporting United States for manufacturing. Japan at one point of time was very poor in quality. I remember my parents used to say, Japani hai kya? To now, when you look at the quality, it's amazing. You look at, many countries which thought their race was, supreme, getting down to supreme quality. So we have to look at, what are some of the lessons. I know that history is a good teacher. You don't always, plan on history, but you learn from history. And therefore, I really believe that our manufacturing has to be given importance. Quality is something, enabling policy where we can import certain things that we do not want to build, but drive with leadership and build a vision that we can accomplish.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Rai, for detailed explanation in terms of how you see manufacturing. Let me now turn to Mr. Amitabh Kant. Sir, you explained this idea that India has in terms of our G20 presidency, India emerging as a force for good, contributing in terms of new areas as geopolitics, geo-environment is evolving. How you see India playing that role of force for good, and in what way you think we can contribute?
So Sachin, I've been a long-term believer that you can't transform the lives of citizens without going digital and without going green. And, actually, it's been 3.5 years while I carry debit card and credit cards, I've not used them in India. I've not been to a ATM machine for over 4 years. I've not been to a physical bank for over 5 years, and I think physical banks in India are almost virtually dead now. The only time I've used my debit credit card was when I went to San Francisco to meet my daughter to hire a Uber car. Throughout the COVID, I got my shots, my booster shot. It was all digital. My daughters were all paperwork in the United States. So what it really demonstrates is that in terms of technology, we are way ahead. We are way ahead. This has happened not because of government alone. This has been a unique work of private sector innovating on top of the rail track built by the government. And that innovation, as I mentioned, a whole range of innovators in the private sector have done. So my view is that if you want to transform the lives of 4 billion people of the world who do not have a digital identity, if you want to transform the lives of 2 billion people who do not have a bank account, I mean, we've put 470 million bank accounts, we put money, 600 schemes of the government, we put money straight into the bank account without a single paisa of leakage. I have also worked in the same government where almost, one of our prime ministers said 85% of the rupee that we give was a leakage. We now do 600 schemes without a single paisa of leakage straight into the bank account of the beneficiary. And therefore, all through the COVID, we could take care of our citizens because of the infrastructure built. Now, this means that it has required a huge amount of work around digital identity first. Without identity, it wouldn't have worked. It has required a huge amount of work and a huge amount of political will to build bank accounts for every citizen. And it has shown tremendous amount of private enterprise that 850 million people in India have smartphones. I mean, these are the people who've transformed. So if you want to transform lives in South Africa, or if you want to transform lives in Africa or Latin America, And if you want to ensure that they are able to get government benefits, or if they are able to really transform agriculture or education or health, there is no other option but to do the kind of digital transformation model which India has pursued. It can't be the big tech model of the United States. It just can't be. It can't be on the basis of the model built by Europe, which is focused on privacy but killed innovation, and therefore the model for the rest of the world is what India has built. And that is the model which will transform lives. So if you want a human-centric approach to growth, if you want to transform citizens' lives, if you want to transform lives of women, which India has done now, the only way out for financial inclusion and for many other transformations will be the model which India has pursued. And therefore, it's not about putting bucks, it's about spreading this model of innovation and this rail tracks across many of these underdeveloped and developing countries of the world. But you have to understand that there are 70 countries in the world which are facing a global debt crisis. And they are facing a global debt crisis because some countries in the world have given them global debt. They've given them debt which is totally opaque, which is non-transparent. Totally opaque, non-transparent. In some countries, the deal was that you'll not even bring it before the parliament of that country. We are not saying that. We are doing it in a very transparent manner, that this is something which has been built, please take it. And take it through our innovators. And this is the only way you'll be able to transform the world.
Thank you. Thanks. In the video that was played before this session, Melinda mentioned in terms of digital divide, and you just now referred to that. How you see global community can work together, India can provide the necessary leadership in terms of overcoming this digital divide, because still quite a few people are left outside this ambit of digital empowerment that you are referring to.
So, Sajjan, first and foremost, you have to understand that, America has built up a model where it has made itself dependent on one supplier across the world. There are top 12, look at the top 15 companies of the United States of America. 89 to 92% supplies coming from one supplier across the world. It's not about decoupling, it's about totally demonopolizing this. Unless and until you don't demonopolize, look at the situation you're ending up. 44% of the chip supply coming from Taiwan. 44% of the chip supply coming from Taiwan. China-Taiwan crisis comes in. America does sanctions. The whole world comes to a standstill. Defense manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, mobile manufacturing. America will put the whole world to a standstill. And therefore, it's for America to understand that it needs to build many other suppliers across the world. Their companies are still not getting away from the earlier model that they've built up. And it's for Ashley Tellis to respond to this.
Ashley.
I'm dying to. I'm dying to.
You got excited, actually.
So I want to make 2 points.
Yeah, okay.
We cannot conduct these conversations as if every outcome is a product of state choice. There is an entire universe out there of business entities which are going to make decisions based on efficiency and profit. If we've ended up with a particular ecology of semiconductor manufacturing, it is because some countries in the world have demonstrated extraordinary efficiency and have utilized those efficiencies to develop monopolies. Now, the state, when it is confronted with these monopolies, basically shudders and looks for ways of diversification. But to imagine that the state is going to find a solution to what is a normal process of distribution decisions and allocation decisions made in the marketplace, I think is fatal. And it goes back to a point that Nivruti made earlier when we talk about manufacturing. Yeah. Just because we care about ensuring ourselves against worst-case outcomes, we cannot pursue economic policies that take us exactly to that place where we produce worst-case outcomes.
Well, the Global Technology Summit is underway with focus on geopolitics of technology. Various discussions on India's role in the soft power and also the use of technology in bringing in supply chain resilience. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.